So hi everyone, and welcome to the Wellness in a New Reality webinar by Mohawk Alumni. My name is Lynn Mattis, and I'm an alumni coordinator at Mohawk College. I'm so glad you're able to join us today and look forward to learning alongside all of you in today's session. Now, I know there is a lot of great material to cover today, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Allison Hallman. Allison is the manager of Student Wellness and Counselling at Mohawk College. She provides support and clinical supervision to the counseling team, as well as management of wellness programming across the college. Recently, Allison has also provided leadership to the COVID-19 response team for students and acts as the public health liaison for the college. Allison graduated from the University of Toronto with a Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology in 2009. Before her graduate studies, she graduated from Queen's University with a bachelor's degree in psychology and went on to complete a postgraduate diploma in addictions treatment and prevention. She has also completed a master's certificate in healthcare management at the Choluchata Executive Education Center at York University. Prior to joining Mohawk College, Allison worked for the Ontario Medical Association's Physician Health Program, providing employee health and wellness education to hospitals and medical schools, supporting healthcare institutions dealing with the intersection of health and work for physicians, and providing support and advocacy for physicians experiencing psychiatric, addiction, and behavioral issues in the workplace. Allison has also worked as a counselor in an inpatient treatment program at Homewood Health Center and as a psychotherapist in a private practice, supporting people with a wide range of mental health and substance abuse related issues. She is also registered with the College of Psychotherapists of Ontario. Allison, thank you so much for being here today. Why don't we go ahead and get started?
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, isn't that a mouthful? That's a pretty big bio. I love those things because they sound so professional, don't they? So I think that's a really good place for us to start. I'm here this afternoon to talk to you about wellness in our new reality. So you've just heard that really lovely explanation of who I am, which I would say pretty much matches with the picture on the screen we have here. But I want to bring you into my reality a little bit. Oops. Let's see here. So there we are. So you get a really pretty picture and then you get the reality. So you'll see in that picture, the picture was taken a few weeks ago. The Christmas tree was still up. But my little folding table that I work on in the living room is often the site of chaos. And so I've got two little kids at home, lots of things going on, and all is not sometimes what it seems. So we're going to spend a little bit of time. I've got about 35 minutes this afternoon before we move into a question period. So we're going to spend a little bit of time going over a wellness model that's called the mental health continuum model. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how that shifts and how we sort of react in times like this and in times like a pandemic. And not something we have a lot of research on, not something that anyone's written the book on, how to survive a pandemic and how to thrive. But I think we're learning a lot as we go, and hopefully we can help today to develop some insights around that. So the first thing I want to do is talk about colors. And this is the mental health continuum model. It's been picked up by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's really gained quite a bit of traction in the military. It's a really good way of looking at our mental health and looking at it on a continuum. We're not in one place all the time. We move back and forth with varying degrees of wellness on any given day. And this is really neat because it takes us from this green place where we're healthy, we're functioning, we're doing really well, to yellow, which is, pretty common. We're stressed out, maybe not at our best. Orange is when we need to start getting a little bit more worried because we've got some, what they refer to there as persistent impairment. So we're really feeling like we can't do what we need to do. And then that red section is for more severe impairment, diagnosable mental illness, when we really feel unwell. We're going to go on to look a little bit more in depth at that. So if we look at these four colors, I'm not going to go over this really in detail, but what we've got here is a list of really what you might see as you live within any one of these color blocks. And I think it's really important to remember that we move throughout these blocks on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes within the day, sometimes I might wake up and I'm feeling green. I've had a good night's sleep. I've been eating well. I'm feeling great. But I start my day and some things start to go wrong. And all of a sudden I notice maybe I'm not coping as well. And I'm sort of sliding into that yellow zone. And that's okay. Again, another thing about this model is it's not meant to be a model where we live in green all the time. Um, we know that our well-being fluctuates on a daily basis. And really we need to look at what's our baseline, what's our norm. If these months during the pandemic, you found that you used to be green and now you're sort of seeing yourself as yellow or orange, that's okay. There's no goal of where you want to be. It's just a way to acknowledge this is where I think I am today. And if we look at the bottom half of this slide, you'll see there's some action steps. So again, when we're healthy, we break things into manageable chunks, we work on things, we focus on staying healthy. When we start to leave that healthier zone, we have to be a little more focused on recognizing our limits, setting healthy boundaries, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves physically, and doing what we need to do to stay well. And it may just be to stay in the yellow zone, and that's okay, or maybe to edge back into that green zone. Again, when we get into that orange and red section, that's when we start looking at what do we need to do to get ourselves help? What do we need to do to get out of that place, especially if we stay in that place for longer than, a short period of time. So this is another way of looking at the model. And what I really like about this, and what I would really encourage folks to think about, is that model we have just showed you is really the horizontal axis here. It's optimal mental well-being to minimal mental well-being. And that is very different than mental illness. So oftentimes when we think about somebody having mental illness, so let's say depression or bipolar disorder, we think about them as unwell. And that's really not accurate. There are lots of people who live with, again, I'm going to use depression and bipolar disorder as examples. They live with those disorders, but they manage them, and they actually can live in a place of optimal well-being in that green zone, despite the fact that they have a diagnosable mental illness. So it's really nice when we take it off of the continuum and we put it on this sort of 4-quadrant model, and we look at the fact that your mental illness can be in a not so great place, or you can be doing really, really well with mental illness. And then your mental well-being can be something unique and different. So obviously we're shooting for that optimal well-being and optimal maximum mental illness sort of place where we're feeling really well on all sides. But there are times that aren't going to be like that. And that's, again, okay. We just need to know, how do I recognize that in myself? And what can I do to support myself? And I love this little comic. Everyone familiar with the good old saying, suit up and show up? So this is a healthcare professional here in the picture. And so often we put on our professional armor, our uniform, our office clothes, whatever it may be, and we show up to work. And we show up and we look good and we pretend everything is okay. And in actual fact, sometimes we're falling apart. And, it's really important to acknowledge that is a suit of armor we put on, even if it's just your, I used to say your suit, but now I say, my jeans and my sweater, because I've given up on my dress code since I've moved to working from my living room. But it is that suit of armor that protects me at work. But sometimes I'm not being so authentic. And again, sometimes that's a good thing because of what I need to do in the day. But sometimes I really need to slow down, check in with myself and say, what? Is what's on the outside really matching what's on the inside? And if not, what do I need to do to take care of myself? So again, we're just going back to the colors here. And the reason I've put this slide back up is because it really highlights what we can see happening as we see a decline in mental well-being. So again, as we get into that yellow zone, a little more moody, some trouble sleeping, low energy, I laugh at this one, decreased socializing. We'll talk about that later on in the presentation again, because for most of us, we are in a constant state of decreased socializing right now. And that's not due to our mental health, but it certainly impacts our mental health. The other thing we look at when we look at these zones is alcohol or substance use, and knowing that, again, low risk alcohol use or gambling can be healthy within that green zone, but it's something that for a lot of people they need to watch because they can see that use escalating as they get stressed. We hear all the time on social media and pop culture, oh, I've had a day, I need a glass of wine. Again, that might be that yellow reacting place. But as we get into orange, we see people maladaptively use alcohol and other substances potentially to try to alleviate some of the mental well-being issues they're having. So again, just watching where you can see any of these symptoms within yourself and looking at what kind of intervention would be best. And when we talk about intervention, I want to talk a little bit just quickly about peer support. So we've got that continuum across the top again, starting with green, being healthy, yellow reacting, orange injured, red ill. In all of those states, we all have the need for people in our lives. And when we're green, social support is generally the biggest amount of support we need. We need the people around us, friends, family, coworkers, neighbors. I've never gotten to know my neighbors as well as I have during the pandemic because they're here when no one else is. That's really the core of what we need when we're healthy. And some of us still need some professional health support, and some of us proactively engage in some professional health support. When you think about, getting your annual physical with your GP, making sure that, you get blood work done every once in a while, or those typical proactive health things. Some folks also engage in things like meditation, mindfulness, maybe some proactive therapy because they've been long-term involved in therapy and feel it's good for their wellness. So there is still that small piece of professional support that's part of that green and healthy place. Again, as we move into yellow, that's when we need to rely on our friends and our family. There might be more of a role for a professional presence in our lives at that point. Maybe, maybe not. Still, friends, family, neighbors, supports really can bolster us and help us to be who, to get where we need to go. But really, it's at that halfway mark in the continuum between yellow and orange that we really note there's a shift in that paradigm. We still need our family and friends. We need to soak up their support and their care. But this is where we really need to say family and friends, coworkers, colleagues, neighbors are not enough. And I need somebody looking after my mental well-being and somebody to help me along the way. And it's really important for those of us who have loved ones, maybe who are struggling with their mental health, to know that when we cross into this section, our care and support, no matter how well-intentioned it is, probably isn't enough. And we can't bear the brunt of, owning someone else's mental health. We really have to say, how can I be the supportive family member who helps you to connect with whatever clinical or medical supports you need? As we get into the red section, which of course is where we have real persistent mental illness, risk issues, suicidal ideation, that sort of thing, the role of friends and family really is minimal. And the role of friends and family is to be supportive, to be there, and to get the person to the medical help they need. So I think it's really important for us during this pandemic, on one hand, to acknowledge what kind of supports are beneficial to me, what kind of supports do I need? And on the other hand, not to take on what is outside of my ability to impact with the people around me. Because so often we see people struggling, and people in general are so helpful and lovely. They want to be kind and they want to come out and help. And so oftentimes when we're looking at more serious mental illness, we need to say our role as helpers and as friends is really to help engage professional support and to be here, just so the person knows we're there in the background and we're supportive. So that's the background I wanted to provide you sort of on that wellness model, which I think is a good way to contextualize what we're going to talk about next. This is For folks who've never seen it before, this is the Choluchata Bridge in Honduras. It's a really interesting architectural wonder, if you will. And what does that have to do with mental health? So kind of cool, this Choluchata Bridge, and I might get the details wrong, but it was built a long time ago now in an area that is very prone to hurricanes. And so I believe it has something to do with the US Army supply chain, whatever it was, they decided they needed to build a bridge that could withstand a hurricane. And you know what? They did. In 1994, I believe it was, Hurricane Mitch hit the new improved Choluchata Bridge. And you know what's really cool about that bridge? It absolutely stood. The bridge did not fall. The bridge was not significantly damaged. It can still hold cars. But funny thing about this world, no matter how strong you build the bridge, you can't control the river. So in this case, Hurricane Mitch came and that river moved. So that architectural wonder then sat to the side of the river and no car could get across the river because the bridge was in the wrong spot. My goodness, the river moved. Well, if ever a river moved, our reality has moved in the last year. So last March 18th, I was at the college. March 19th, I was home working in my living room where you see me now. Our river moved. Our river moved in a way that we could never anticipate. If you would have asked me last January about, what we were calling coronavirus at the time, I would have said, yeah, that's a thing happening in China. I remember I went on a conference in February and somebody asked me if I wanted to take a mask for the airplane. And I kind of looked at them and thought, that'd be kind of reactive of me, don't you think? People might be afraid of me. I don't really think we're at a place where we need to wear a mask on an airplane. Well, famous last words, Allison. That was February, and at March, here I was back in my living room. So I want to talk a little bit about what it's like taking care of your mental health in a pandemic. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about when I talk about mental health, is this little model here, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic. This is the human function curve. And the human function curve talks about how when we experience stress, it gets a real bad rap. We say, oh, stress, it's a bad thing. Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. A little bit of stress is what often motivates us to do really great things. So if you look at this model, which is actually really, this model I think originally was focused on high performance athletes and looking at if they're not training hard enough, they're not progressing, they're not getting better. And that's when we look at them being in the drone zone. And folks who have had, if you've ever had a job where you feel like you're just not using enough of your mind, or maybe you've been doing the same task or the same job for too long and you feel like, gosh, I go in and I'm on autopilot and nothing ever happens. That's not really a good place to be. Often we find that when we have a little bit of stress, a little bit of push on us to do a little bit more, to think a little bit more, to push ourselves a little bit harder, that's when our state of arousal, so our state of stress goes up, but we often become really good at achieving things. We're getting positive reward. It's a good place to be. And that's, if you see in that zone, they call it the creative calm, the C zone. And I will tell you, I love to live at the top of this graph here, right at that peak spot. That is when I am under stress and I am flying. I'm doing great things. I'm working fast, working hard, working well. My work output is good and I feel good about it. So yes, I'm stressed, but I feel good about it. And then we tip over the top of the scale when stress becomes too much and it becomes distress. And that's when we start to see people getting tired, people getting ill. We see a decline in performance and we see burnout, breakdown. Those things start to happen. So that's something that I love to talk about when I talk about mental health, because we give stress such a bad name, and it's important to acknowledge it's a good thing for most of us in small amounts. Well, if we put these dates on top of this curve here, many of us were already kind of feeling stressed, or maybe we were at the top of our game back in February 2020. We were still in the workplace. We were doing whatever we needed to do, probably somewhere around the top half of the curve. Then we went into lockdown that first time, that first state of emergency was declared. And for a lot of people, that wasn't a particularly bad day. We knew there were things we had to do, right? So practical, pragmatic things take over. Do I have groceries? Did anyone go to the grocery store that week? The lineups in the grocery stores. People were not, sort of locked up at home right away. Everyone went into, what do I need to do? What comes next? And that's a really normal human response. The toilet paper buying, really normal human response. Most of us knew no benefit to toilet paper. I certainly knew that I did not need toilet paper. But then the little voice in my head said, but if everyone else buys up the toilet paper, eventually we're going to run out of toilet paper and I'm not going to have any toilet paper. So maybe I should go to the store and buy toilet paper too. Again, I know better than that, but the thinking takes over. Now, if we look at being in that peak place in March, what happens as we continue to go through this and the pandemic continues to go and we continue to deal with the increasing stressors that many of us have of competing work-life balance, children at home, maybe jobs that have changed, jobs that have ended, being in the job market again, or having a job that has changed so much that you just don't want to be there anymore. I know for many of our folks in long-term care, folks working in long-term care are often in that field because they love the work and they love the people. And this has really pushed a lot of people to the limit. So we know that there is something called allostatic load, and allostatic load is the wear and tear of the body of chronic stress. And so again, peak high periods of stress for a short burst of time, that's okay. It's when we start to see stress over a long period of time, that chronic stress, that we start to see some real negative impacts on our physical wellness and our mental well-being. So this is a cool kind of concept that we came up with by a doctor in the US. And this looks at the 4 waves of a pandemic. So we're not talking about waves like we hear in the media. In the media right now, we hear about wave 1 happening back in the spring and wave 2 being now. That's the wave of COVID infections. But what this model looks at is, in the event of a pandemic, any pandemic, how does it impact people and how does it impact the healthcare system? So the first wave is looking at the immediate deaths and illness that the pandemic creates. So that is the impact of COVID-19. The second wave, being that green line there, looks at the impact on the restriction of resources. So that is what we are seeing right now when we hear in the news about patients having to be moved from one hospital system to another, to overflow units being used. That's really what we're looking at, is the restriction of ICU beds that aren't available to motor vehicle accidents or cardiac care patients because those beds are used in that first wave COVID group. When we look at the third wave, again, you'll see that blue line peaks a little bit further down in time. And that's the interruption in chronic care. So those are our folks who need diabetes treatment, hypertension treatment, ongoing care for cardiac issues. Those folks need long-term care, and we see interruptions in that. I was reading an article the other day that talked about cancer screenings and prenatal care, and that both of those have gone down in the pandemic because people don't want to go to the doctors and they don't want to have those routine things done. And that's where we see the real impact there, is in that third wave. But what we're here to talk about today is this fourth wave. And often I feel like it gets a lot of lip service at the front end, says, oh, mental health is a big deal, but we don't get beyond that. And the fourth wave is really looking at the psychological impact and mental illness of the long-term effect of being in a pandemic, the economic impact. And beyond the economics, it's the mental health impact of economics upon us. All right, there is very little that is more stressful on an individual or a family than economic distress. Loss of career, loss of sort of stability that come with some of those financial means. And of course, burnout. So I think this is a really good way to look at how many of us, although the first wave back in the spring was stressful and limiting, we had a lot more resources personally and within our own self at that time to maybe handle it. And as the time keeps going and gets longer and longer, we really need to be more and more concerned about our mental health and the mental health of those around us. So just to put things in perspective for you, this, as we talk about stress, stress is not so much about what's actually happening, but it's about our perception of what an event is and our ability to cope with it. So we can control our stress by adjusting our perceptions so that they are either they are positive and consider possible solutions. We know most folks have heard about cognitive behavior therapy and talking about your thoughts. We know there's a relationship between your thoughts, your mood, your feelings, and behavior. And so for us to develop that knowledge and understanding of how we react to stress is really important. And I think it's really, so I've got this graphic up here for you, and I've altered it a little bit because when I pulled this picture off the internet, it's a really cute picture. I really like it, but you'll see that novel coronavirus is in the bottom corner, having not very many deaths associated to it. So I do think it's still an important picture. This is the death toll of different pandemics throughout our history. And if you look at it, you can see things like SARS and Ebola are on there, the swine flu, all the way up to HIV/AIDS, smallpox, and the bubonic plague. If you look at my little purple blob that I added, that's where we sit today with COVID-19. We're at, I think, about 4 million deaths worldwide. So we're certainly not down at the bottom end, but I think it's a really good contextual example to provide that within history, we have faced things like this before, and not just the Spanish flu, which I know we have a lot of comparisons with. But it's really easy when you get involved with reading the headlines to think that we're in a really scary, uncontrollable time. And I'll tell you for myself personally, I don't know that I believe that. I know that I like to focus, and I have little people, as you saw at the beginning of the presentation. I like to focus on them about what we have control over, because I don't have control over the pandemic. I don't have control over Doug Ford or Justin Trudeau or what decisions they make, but I have control over washing my hands, wearing a mask, making good decisions. And I know really, I'm not invincible. I could still get COVID, but I know what to do to make sure that it's unlikely to happen. And so if I feel in control of my situation and I can contextualize how things are, it gives me more resilience and more ability to deal with what's coming. But what often happens is then I open the newspaper or I see the headlines flashing when I scroll through Facebook, which is my thing. I turn it on to check, what my friends' kids are doing. And some headline will pop up about, the death tolls are skyrocketing. And when you read through the article, you realize, okay, so, the real data is there and it's still terrible, but it's not nearly as scary as what the news line was on top. Because let's face it, headlines are meant to sell newspapers and sell stories. So really just want you to think for yourself about how you perceive stress and how you within yourself really contextualize and understand what's coming in towards you, because it's a really helpful way to manage your own stress levels. So I want you to think for a second and just really reflect. If I were to have asked you in November 2019, so we're coming up to Christmas, no one has heard of really Wuhan unless you decided to go on a trip to China and that was one of your spots to stop. No one's heard of Wuhan. No one's concerned about this at all. It's November 2019. What was your stress level like? Because I thought I was stressed. I thought I was busy. Compared to my norm, we were coming up to year end. For me in the college, the semester was coming up to the end. So we knew we had more students we needed to deal with. It was a stressful time of year. And then have you reflect on, are you stressed now? What's the difference between the stress you had then and the stress you have today? And what's even more important is it's a good question to reflect on, and I wouldn't ever ask anyone to answer this question, but will you be stressed tomorrow? Because some of us have already made the decision that tomorrow is going to be a stressful day. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we think tomorrow is going to be stressful, it probably is. So again, looking at what do I have control over? How can I sort of take that belief and maybe twist it a little bit so that there's some doubt in my mind that tomorrow might not be such a bad day. I might not be so stressed tomorrow, because I truly believe I'm pretty stressed all the time. And it's really about my mental well-being, how well I'm coping with that stress and how I'm viewing it. I don't think there's that much more or less stress on any given day. It's about my ability to process it and deal with it. And just to give you another little sort of reality check around our stress level and these epidemics and pandemics that we've been through, if we look at this timeline, again, I've pulled off the internet, it's not my graphic, but my goodness, look at all of these terrible things we've lived through. And we've done pretty well as a whole. And yes, these things have impacted a lot of people in a really negative way. The same way that COVID has. It's been a really awful experience for a lot of people. But I think this is to say there is hope. We have come through these things. And as a society, we have come out on the other side and we've been okay. And I think in taking care of our own mental well-being, it's really important to know that for most of us, we're going to be okay. And we talk about the new normal, but knowing that whatever that new normal will be, hopefully we will all thrive again in the future. Another piece, I want to switch gears a little bit from talking about stress to talking about grief, because it is another one of these feelings that sometimes is part of our lives. And I would argue right now is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have to face. And many times when we talk about grief, we get really focused on grief and death. And grief is synonymous with death. And I know that if someone I love or somebody I care about dies, I'm going to go through a grief process. And most of us have heard there's like stages of grieving and there's things we have to go through. But we really associate that with the loss of somebody we care about. And so what I really want to convey today is that in this post-pandemic sort of world that we're now living in, grief is associated to all of our losses. And those losses can be really broad, right? I look at, in my house, Christmas is a really big deal with our extended family. We have a really huge group of people that get together every year at Christmas. We didn't get to do that this year. Normally I have a book club that gets together, and I have some girls that really connect, and that's our stress relief, and we get together and we enjoy each other's company. It gives me a good reason to clean my house every couple of weeks because everyone's coming over. Those are things I've lost. We've lost that normal pace of life. We've lost the safety maybe that we felt we had with respect to our health. One of the things on this list is touch, and I think that's really important. How many folks have noticed maybe, I don't feel like I was a hugger before. I don't feel like I was that person who reached out and hugged everybody. But I'm starting to question that, because really, I feel like I hugged a lot more people before this happened than I do now. It's noticeable to me when I'm, out and about in the world, or when I'm talking to people, how little I actually touch anyone or come in contact with anyone. It's not like we're having a dinner party and hugging everyone goodbye at the end. It's a real change for me, right? We've lost our ability to make our own decisions around some things, right? I can no longer decide if I want to go on, if I'm going on vacation or where I'm going. And of course, there's the economic and the financial impact that has been so hard on so many folks. So I think it's just really important to acknowledge that when it comes to any or all of these issues, or many more for other people, allow and acknowledge that it is grief. It is a grief process we're going through, and it is very similar to if you had lost a loved one, if you're losing something that was a really big and important part of your life. And really look at if we knew, if my best friend was grieving the loss of their loved one, what would I tell them? What advice would I give them about that grief? What advice would I give them about taking care of themselves as they went through the loss of a loved one? Now I need to flip that script and say, I've gone through the loss of these things that mattered to me, and I need to take that same advice I would give to my best friend when they lost someone, and I need to give it to myself, right? Take care of yourself, do what you need to do, take your time to recover. And we have a little graphic here. This is one we put out to the students at the college just around some of the things they would maybe be grieving last spring. And I think it just provides a good example of some of the losses. And I won't even try to guess all of the losses people have had, because there have been substantial losses. So really think for yourself, if this is the list we came up with for some of our students, what would your list look like? And have you had time to process and honor those losses during this pandemic? So I'm going to spend our last few minutes just talking about strategies. And many of you may be thinking, well, I came here for wellness strategies, and we're going to talk about them for the last couple of minutes. That's because I truly believe most of you probably already know what you need to know. When we talk about self-care, we talk about getting exercise, eating well, sleeping well, avoiding risks. So not smoking, not drinking too much, washing our hands, brushing our teeth. These are the kindergarten rules. They're the things we have been taught our whole life. And when we talk about self-care, we tend to trump these things up and say that they're so important. Well, they've always been important. And most of us know that we do better when we do them, and we do worse when we don't. But sometimes we don't feel like we have that ability to make that choice. So even though I know that if I eat well and sleep well, I'm going to feel better, sometimes I might not feel like I can eat better and sleep better. Maybe it just feels like too much today. So I'm going to leave you with the idea that I believe you know how to take care of yourself. I believe you know what is right for your wellness, and that sometimes it's just in talking about it, in naming and saying out loud, you know what, I need to do this. And, sometimes I can't hold myself accountable. And so can you hold me accountable? I have a team that we huddle together 3 times a week. And one of the things we talk about is, did I do what I say I was going to do? So for me, that's always about getting outside, because I don't get outside enough. And I know that a little bit of sunshine does me a world of good. So again, I check in with people and I let them know my plan is to get outside today, because if I tell you I'm going to do it, the chances are more likely that I will. So this is here. It is important to do self-care. It's important to do whatever nourishes your soul. And you're the only one who really will know the answer to that. I love to read a good book, but some people find that more stressful. Yoga, mindfulness, meditation, hiking, nature, whatever it is for you, find what nourishes your soul and make sure you incorporate that into your days. And if it can't be incorporated into your day, can it be incorporated into your week? And if it can't be, how can you make a change? And one of the biggest changes that I need to make, here's my cute little kids again, is how I view the pandemic and how I view working from home. Because I never set out to be a stay-at-home mom. I didn't think I had it in me. I look at those women and I'm amazed at how they do it. I always knew I would be a working mother. And at the same time, I always thought, it's too bad I don't get that time with my kids. But that's not for me. Well, on days when I'm feeling stressed and the work seems to keep coming and the kids are driving me crazy and I'm in this pandemic world and everyone's telling me that it is so stressful and so hard to be at home working and homeschooling, and those messages are all around me, I sometimes just need to shake my head and say, okay, it's about what I tell myself. And for me, the example here is that, before this lockdown, I was walking my girls to school every morning. And that voice in my head says, you know, you're a working mother, you work, you need to be at your computer, you can't step away from the computer, you're not working hard, you can't, you know, people will wonder where you are. And I need to stop that tape from playing and say, wow, I'm grateful for this opportunity. Never as a working mother did I think I would have the opportunity to walk my girls to school each and every morning. I see their teachers. I see their friends they talk with. I know the crossing guard now. These are opportunities I never would have had. And so the same situation, two different perspectives. And to be honest, I hold them both. But when one voice gets a little louder, I need to say, okay, it's time to be quiet. I am grateful. And I'll tell you, I have never known my kids as well as I have in the last year. There are times where it is incredibly stressful, but I choose to view it as a gift. And on days when it's really stressful, I sit down with pen and paper and I make my list of things I'm grateful for, of things the pandemic has given me that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Don't get me wrong. I'd still want the pandemic to be over yesterday, and it's a horrible thing that's happened. But since I have to live through it, I choose to look for what it is that it's brought me, how it's helped, the opportunities it's given me, and how it will change how I live my life moving forward.
Thank you so much again, Allison, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share your insights with us. I think it was very relatable and very much appreciated, especially as we're sitting in January, which is always kind of a darker, colder time of the year. There are also a number of other upcoming virtual events by Mohawk alumni, including trivia nights, yoga and meditation classes, interactive career workshops, as well as 2 upcoming webinars. So on February 17th, you can join us for the Living Fearless Mindset webinar, where we'll sit down with Mohawk graduate and personal development coach Lisa McDonald to talk about overcoming negative thought patterns and building a fearless mindset. And also on March 10th, Mohawk graduate and business and accounting professor Michael Elliott will explore ways we can simplify our approach to budgeting and saving in the Making Sense of Personal Finance webinar. So you can find all event details at the website you see on your screen right now, which is mohawkcollege.ca/alumni events. Thank you everyone again for joining us today and for staying connected with Mohawk. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye for now, everyone, and take good care.